The morning sun cast long shadows across the Miller farm in rural Kansas when the first signs appeared. Sarah Miller was hanging laundry on the line behind their modest farmhouse. The same routine she had followed for 37 years of marriage to Tom. The white sheets flapped gently in the prairie wind, and everything seemed perfectly normal until the sky began to shimmer. At first, Sarah thought it was heat waves rising from the distant fields, but the distortion grew stronger, spreading across the horizon like ripples on water. She called out to Tom, who was fixing the fence near their old red barn. Her voice carried that particular urgency that comes from decades of marriage, the kind that makes a husband drop his tools and run. Tom Miller had served 2 tours in Vietnam before coming home to farm the land his grandfather had worked. His weathered hands had held rifles and plowshares with equal skill, but nothing had prepared him for what descended from that shimmering sky. The craft was massive, easily the size of their entire property, its surface reflecting light in ways that hurt to look at directly. It moved with impossible silence, casting shadows that seemed to bend reality itself. The couple stood frozen in their backyard, holding hands instinctively, as the alien vessel settled just above their neighbor's wheat field. For a moment, nothing happened. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then smaller crafts emerged from the mothership, sleek and predatory, spreading out across the countryside like metallic wasps from a disturbed nest. What followed would haunt Tom and Sarah for the rest of their lives. The aliens moved with methodical precision through the small farming community of Cedar Ridge. They took families, not everyone, not randomly, but specific households that seemed chosen according to some incomprehensible criteria. The Johnsons from 3 miles down the road, the Martinez family who ran the local grocery store, young couples with children, elderly pairs like themselves, single farmers living alone, all simply vanished, leaving behind empty homes with doors standing open and meals half-finished on kitchen tables. Tom and Sarah survived by pure chance. They had been visiting Sarah's sister in Topeka when the initial sweep occurred, returning home 2 days later to find their world fundamentally changed. 17 families gone without a trace, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no explanation from the government officials who arrived in black SUVs and spoke in careful, measured phrases about isolated incidents and ongoing investigations. But Tom Miller had not survived Vietnam by accepting official explanations that made no sense. While the government cordoned off the area and installed monitoring equipment, he began his own investigation. Sarah, who had taught elementary school for 30 years and understood how to gather information from reluctant sources, proved equally determined. They discovered the pattern within a week of careful questioning and observation. The aliens had taken complete family units. Parents with children, grandparents, entire bloodlines when they lived in proximity to each other. The selection process appeared to prioritize genetic diversity and healthy specimens. But there was something else, something the government investigators seemed either unable or unwilling to recognize. The chosen families had all shared certain characteristics beyond their genetic profiles. They were the community leaders, the families with deep roots, the ones whose absence would create the largest social vacuum. Sarah connected the dots first during a conversation with Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter's family had been taken. "It's like they knew exactly who mattered," the elderly woman said through tears. "Who held this place together? Now look at us. Half the businesses closed. The school district talking about consolidation, people leaving every week. They didn't just take our loved ones, they took our heart." The realization hit Tom like a physical blow. This was not random harvesting or scientific sampling. This was strategic social decapitation. The aliens had studied their community, identified the key family networks that maintained social cohesion, and systematically removed them. It was psychological warfare on a scale he had never imagined, even during his darkest days in Southeast Asia. Over the following months, as Cedar Ridge continued to hemorrhage residents and local institutions collapsed, Tom and Sarah began to piece together additional information. Other rural communities across the Midwest had experienced similar incidents, always the same pattern of selective removal, always followed by social collapse and economic abandonment. The aliens were not just taking humans, they were systematically destroying the fabric of rural American life. The government response remained frustratingly inadequate. Press conferences spoke of unidentified aerial phenomena and missing persons investigations, But no mention was ever made of the obvious pattern. No acknowledgement that entire communities were being deliberately dismantled. Tom began to suspect that certain officials knew more than they were admitting, but their priorities lay elsewhere. Urban populations were unaffected. Military installations remained untouched. The aliens seemed focused exclusively on isolated, tight-knit rural communities. By winter, Cedar Ridge was a ghost town in all but name. The post office closed in October. The grain elevator shut down in November. The school consolidated with a district 40 miles away, and most of the remaining families moved to follow their children's education. Tom and Sarah remained, partly from stubbornness, partly from a growing certainty that running would solve nothing. They were not entirely alone. A handful of other survivors remained scattered across the affected areas, mostly older couples like themselves who had nowhere else to go or refused to abandon their homes. Through careful networking and communication, they began to form loose connections, sharing information and theories about their situation. It was during one of these conversations that Sarah made the observation that would change everything. She was speaking with Helen Morrison, whose family had run the hardware store for 3 generations. When Helen mentioned something her grandson had told her before he disappeared. Little Timothy was always fascinated by space and aliens, Helen said. He used to check out every book the library had about UFOs and space exploration. The day before they took him, he came running over, all excited. Said he had figured out something important from one of his books, something about royal families. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. What about royal families? He said the aliens must be like the old European kingdoms, that they probably had royal bloodlines too, and that's why they were taking whole families. He thought they wanted to study how human families worked, or maybe they were collecting them like trophies. That night, Tom found Sarah sitting at their kitchen table with every book about extraterrestrial encounters she had been able to gather from the abandoned library. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the same intensity he had seen when she tackled difficult students or fought the school board over budget cuts. Tom, she said quietly, what if Timothy was right? What if they do have royal families? And what if we could find them? The idea consumed Sarah Miller through the long winter months. While snow covered the abandoned fields around Cedar Ridge, she transformed their spare bedroom into a research center that would have impressed any intelligence analyst. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins showing alien activity sites. String connected locations in patterns that revealed flight paths and timing sequences. Stacks of books about extraterrestrial encounters, military strategy, and even medieval European history covered every available surface. Tom initially thought his wife had chosen an impossible task to distract herself from grief. But as Sarah's research progressed, her theories began to make disturbing sense. She had identified 17 separate alien incursion sites across North America, each following the same pattern of selective family removal. More importantly, she had tracked the timing and discovered that these operations occurred in cycles, suggesting a coordinated campaign rather than random harvesting. They're not just taking families, Sarah explained one evening, spreading photographs and documents across their dining room table. They're mapping our social structures. Look at this. She pointed to a detailed chart showing the relationships between taken families. The Johnsons were the largest landowners in the county. The Martinez family controlled food distribution through their store. The Hendersons ran the bank. They didn't just take people, they took the economic foundation of our community. Tom studied the information with the same methodical attention he had once applied to enemy troop movements. Sarah was right. The aliens had conducted what amounted to a sociological dissection of rural American life. But understanding their methods still left the larger question unanswered: why? The answer came through an unexpected source. Helen Morrison had been corresponding with other survivors across the affected regions, and through these networks, they learned about Dr. Elena Vasquez. Dr. Vasquez had been a xenobiology researcher at NASA before the government shuttered her program following the first alien encounters. Officially, she had been reassigned to terrestrial biological surveys. Unofficially, she had continued her extraterrestrial research independently. Sarah contacted Dr. Vasquez through encrypted channels that Tom's military contacts had provided. The scientist agreed to meet them at an abandoned gas station halfway between Cedar Ridge and her current location in Colorado. The meeting took place on a bitter February morning, with wind howling across empty plains and snow. Devils dancing in the distance. Dr. Vasquez was a small woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held the intensity of someone who had seen official truth give way to uncomfortable reality. She carried a battered briefcase filled with documents that officially did not exist, research that had been classified beyond public access. "The government knows more than they're admitting," she said without preamble. "These aliens, they're not explorers or scientists. They're administrators. They're conducting what appears to be a territorial survey, mapping human social organization with the same precision we might use to catalog animal species before habitat modification." Sarah leaned forward eagerly. "Habitat modification? Colony preparation," Dr. Vasquez replied grimly. "They're not planning to coexist with us. They're planning to replace us. But first, they need to understand how we organize ourselves, what holds our communities together, how to most efficiently dismantle our social structures." Tom felt familiar tactical patterns clicking into place in his mind. "They're conducting reconnaissance for a larger operation." "Exactly. And based on the patterns I've identified, the main invasion force will arrive within the next 18 months. These preliminary operations are just the intelligence-gathering phase." Sarah spread her own research across the hood of Tom's pickup truck. "We think they have royal families, hierarchical structures like historical human kingdoms. If we're right, then they have bloodlines that matter to them, families that hold their society together the same way ours do." Dr. Vasquez studied Sarah's charts with growing excitement. That would explain their focus on complete family units. "They're not just studying our social organization. They're collecting examples, probably for some kind of comparative analysis, understanding how different species maintain social cohesion through family structures. The question is," Tom said slowly, "can we track this process in reverse? If they're studying our families, they must have operational bases, command structures, maybe even brought their own important families to oversee the operation." For the first time since the conversation began, Dr. Vasquez smiled. "Now you're thinking like a xenobiologist. Yes, based on the scale and coordination of these operations, they would need local command authority. And if their society truly mirrors historical human models, that authority would be vested in high-ranking family groups." They spent the rest of the morning developing a theoretical framework. If the aliens operated through family-based hierarchies, then their invasion force would include not just military personnel, but administrative families responsible for post-conquest governance. These families would be irreplaceable, genetically and culturally important to their species' future plans for Earth. Sarah voiced the thought that had been growing in all their minds. If we could identify their command families, if we could threaten them the way they've threatened ours, it would be asymmetrical warfare, Tom finished. David versus Goliath. Dr. Vasquez packed her papers carefully. "I can't officially support any action you might choose to take, but I can tell you that my research suggests their command ships remain in orbit, probably positioned over geosynchronous satellites to monitor their ground operations. And I can tell you that if someone were to acquire certain types of radio equipment, they might be able to track the communication patterns between ground teams and orbital command." She handed Sarah a piece of paper with technical specifications written in careful handwriting. Hypothetically speaking, of course. After Dr. Vasquez left, Tom and Sarah sat in their truck for a long time, watching snow blow across the empty landscape. They were two retired Americans, a farmer and a school teacher, contemplating taking action against an alien invasion that their own government seemed unable or unwilling to address effectively. "You know this is probably suicide," Tom said finally. Sarah nodded. Timothy Morrison was 8 years old. He figured out that aliens might have royal families, and they took him for it. Took his parents, his grandparents, his baby sister. Erased his entire bloodline because a little boy was too smart for his own good. She turned to face her husband, and Tom saw the expression that had made her legendary among difficult students and stubborn school board members. "They want to study how families hold communities together? Let's show them how American families fight back when someone threatens their home." Tom started the engine and began the drive back to Cedar Ridge. By the time they reached their farmhouse, they had begun planning the most ambitious and dangerous operation of their lives. 2 retirees against an alien invasion force. It should have been absurd. Instead, it felt like the only sane response to an insane situation. That evening, Sarah began making phone calls to the other survivor networks they had identified. Tom drove into town to visit the abandoned electronics store, where certain items might still be available for the right purpose. Neither of them spoke about the probability of success. They both understood that some fights are worth having regardless of the odds. Spring arrived in Cedar Ridge with cruel irony. The abandoned fields that should have been planted with corn and wheat instead bloomed with wildflowers, creating beautiful meadows where productive farmland once fed families. Tom Miller stood in his backyard, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, while sophisticated radio equipment hummed quietly in their converted barn. The winter months had transformed the elderly couple into something their younger selves might not have recognized. Sarah had become a signals intelligence analyst, spending 12-hour days monitoring alien communications and mapping their operational patterns. Tom had evolved into a tactical planner, using skills he had hoped never to need again, coordinating with other survivor groups across 7 states. Their network had grown beyond anything they had initially imagined. Retired military personnel, former intelligence operatives, engineers, scientists, and ordinary citizens who had lost everything to the alien incursions. People who shared the common bond of being dismissed by official channels while watching their communities systematically destroyed. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning in April. Sarah was monitoring what had become known as Command Frequency 7, tracking the regular communication pulses between alien ground teams and their orbital vessels, when the pattern suddenly changed. Instead of the usual tactical chatter, she detected something different. Extended transmissions with complex harmonic structures that suggested formal communications rather than operational orders. "Tom," she called from the barn. "You need to hear this." Tom arrived to find Sarah hunched over their modified radio array, her face flushed with excitement and exhaustion. She had been tracking this particular frequency for 6 weeks, gradually learning to distinguish between different types of alien communications. This was something new. "It's ceremonial," she said, adjusting the audio filters. "Listen to the rhythm, the formal patterns. This isn't military communication. This sounds like official court proceedings or maybe diplomatic protocols." Tom heard it immediately. The alien voices carried a different cadence, more formal and structured than the efficient tactical communications they had been monitoring. Through the electronic translation system that Dr. Vasquez had helped them acquire, fragments of meaning emerged, references to bloodline authority and hereditary command privilege, discussions of succession protocols, and family honor obligations. Most importantly, specific references to locations and timing that suggested high-ranking family groups were being transported to Earth for direct oversight of the invasion. Preparations. Sarah spent the next 3 days analyzing every transmission, building a comprehensive picture of what appeared to be an elaborate alien royal protocol. The invasion was not just a military operation but a family enterprise, with different alien bloodlines claiming territorial rights to different regions of Earth. The preliminary operations they had witnessed were essentially advance parties preparing domains for their respective royal houses. "They're not just invading," Sarah explained during one of their encrypted conference calls with other survivor groups. "They're dividing up the planet like European nobles carving up colonial territories. Each major family group gets assigned a continental region to govern after the main invasion succeeds." The implications were staggering. If Sarah's analysis was correct, the alien command structure included multiple royal families with competing interests and overlapping territorial claims. More importantly, these families were personally present in the orbital command ships, overseeing their investments in Earth's future. Tom felt the familiar cold clarity that had served him in combat situations. The aliens had made a strategic error. They had brought their irreplaceable leadership elements within striking range of Earth-based operations. It was the kind of mistake that could change the outcome of an entire war. But identifying the opportunity was only the first step. Acting on it would require capabilities that their small network did not possess. They needed weapons that could reach orbital targets, navigation systems accurate enough to strike specific ships among a fleet, and most critically, intelligence precise enough to identify which ships carried the royal families. The solution came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen had been a NASA guidance systems engineer before losing his wife and twin daughters in the Colorado incursions. His technical expertise, combined with his personal motivation for revenge, made him invaluable to their growing operation. Marcus had maintained contact with former colleagues still working within the official government response, and through these channels, he learned about Project Looking Glass. Looking Glass was a classified military program designed to track and potentially intercept the alien orbital fleet. The project existed in bureaucratic limbo, neither officially approved nor completely shut down, surviving on redirected funding and the determination of military officers who refused to accept that Earth's defense capabilities were entirely inadequate. Marcus arranged a clandestine meeting between Tom and Colonel Janet Rodriguez, Looking Glass's commanding officer. Colonel Rodriguez was a career Air Force officer who had watched helplessly as her superiors chose political expediency over effective action against the alien threat. She was hungry for any opportunity to actually fight back. The meeting took place at an abandoned military facility in Nevada, a forgotten outpost from Cold War missile defense programs. Colonel Rodriguez arrived with two of her key personnel, Major Stevens, a former bomber pilot, and Dr. Park, a weapons system specialist. They brought classified information about the alien orbital fleet and, more importantly, access to modified ballistic missiles that could theoretically reach the alien command ships. Officially, this meeting never happened, Colonel Rodriguez said. Unofficially, we have 6 Atlas V rockets that were supposed to be decommissioned last year. They're sitting in a storage facility in Utah with minimal security and paperwork that shows them as already scrapped. Tom studied the technical specifications they provided. The missiles could reach the alien fleet, but accuracy would be limited. They would have perhaps 6 shots at targets moving in complex orbital patterns, with no opportunity for course correction once launched. Sarah spread her communication intercepts across the table. We can identify which ships carry the royal families, but only during their formal communication sessions. They follow strict protocols about when and how the Bloodline leaders communicate with ground forces. We would have maybe a 4-hour window every 2 weeks when we could be certain of our targets. Major Stevens leaned forward. 6 missiles, multiple targets, moving platforms, limited window of opportunity. It's not impossible, but it's close. Dr. Park was studying Sarah's frequency analysis charts. The communication patterns suggest a hierarchical structure, with primary and secondary bloodlines. If we could identify the Supreme Royal Family, eliminating them might create a succession crisis that would disrupt their entire operation. Tom felt the tactical picture forming in his mind. It was desperate and complex, requiring precise timing and a level of coordination that would challenge far larger and better equipped forces. But it was possible. Colonel Rodriguez stood and gathered her documents. If someone were to hypothetically acquire certain decommissioned missiles, and if someone else were to provide targeting data for alien command vessels, the results might significantly disrupt their invasion timeline. She handed Tom a secure communication device. This conversation never happened, but if you decide to take any theoretical action, we might be able to provide technical support for certain hypothetical operations. After the military personnel left, Tom and Sarah sat alone in the empty facility, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere above them, alien royal families were planning the conquest and colonization of Earth, confident in their technological superiority and strategic advantage. "We're really going to do this," Sarah said quietly. Tom nodded. 2 retired Americans against alien royalty. If we succeed, we save the world. If we fail, at least we go out fighting. Sarah took his hand. Timothy Morrison was right about royal families. I wonder if he ever imagined that someday American farmers would be hunting alien nobles. They began the long drive back to Cedar Ridge, where final preparations waited. The most audacious military operation in human history would be planned in a Kansas farmhouse and executed by a network of survivors that official channels had dismissed as irrelevant. The aliens had studied human families to understand how they held communities together. They were about to learn how American families fought back when pushed too far. The converted Miller barn had become mission control for what the survivors privately called Operation Family Tree. Banks of computers hummed alongside radio equipment, satellite communication arrays, and tactical planning displays that would have been impressive in any military command center. Sarah's dining room table now served as the primary intelligence analysis station. covered with orbital trajectory charts, communication intercept transcripts, and detailed profiles of alien royal family hierarchies. 3 months of intensive preparation had transformed their small network into something approaching a legitimate military operation. Marcus Chen had established secure communication links with sympathetic personnel at 17 different government installations. Colonel Rodriguez had quietly diverted resources and expertise to support their mission. Most importantly, Dr. Vasquez had provided the breakthrough intelligence that made their audacious plan actually feasible. The alien royal families were not merely coordinating the invasion from orbit. They were conducting elaborate succession rituals, positioning their various bloodlines for post-conquest territorial assignments. These ceremonies required the physical presence of all major family groups in Earth's orbital space, gathered together in the primary command vessel for what their translation suggested was a formal establishment of colonial authority. Sarah had identified the pattern through weeks of careful analysis. Every 47 days, the scattered alien ships would converge into a tight formation around the largest vessel, designated Alpha Ship by their tracking systems. During these gatherings, the royal families would engage in extended formal communications, establishing precedents and territorial claims for the anticipated post-invasion period. The next convergence was scheduled for June 15th. Sarah's calculations indicated that all major royal bloodlines would be present in Alpha Ship during a 6-hour window, making their desperate gambit theoretically possible. They would have one opportunity to eliminate the alien leadership structure in a single coordinated strike. Tom stood in the pre-dawn darkness of June 14th, watching their team make final preparations. The 6 modified Atlas V missiles were positioned at 3 separate launch sites across Utah and Nevada, their targeting systems synchronized with tracking data being provided by Looking Glass assets. Each missile carried a modified warhead designed to penetrate alien ship hulls, with backup detonation systems in case their primary weapons failed to achieve complete destruction. The human element of their operation impressed Tom more than the technology. 47 people from 7 states had volunteered for various aspects of the mission, knowing that discovery would mean either death or imprisonment on charges of terrorism and treason. Former military personnel, displaced civilians, retired scientists and engineers, united by the common experience of watching their government fail to protect their communities. Helen Morrison had insisted on participating despite her 72 years, arguing that her grandson's memory deserved representation in their strike against the aliens who had taken him. She was monitoring communication intercepts from the backup facility they had established in an abandoned missile silo. Marcus Chen's wife had driven from California to operate one of their satellite uplinks, saying that her daughter's deaths had earned her the right to help plan revenge. Sarah had barely slept in the past week, obsessing over details that could determine success or failure. The timing had to be precise within minutes. The targeting data had to account for orbital mechanics that were still not completely understood. Most critically, they had to coordinate their strike to occur during the royal succession ceremony, when all the important bloodlines would be gathered in the primary command vessel. At 0400 hours, Sarah received confirmation that Alpha Ship was beginning its convergence maneuvers. The other alien vessels were moving into ceremonial formation, exactly as her intelligence analysis had predicted. Colonel Rodriguez's tracking stations confirmed that the orbital pattern matched their calculations perfectly. Tom activated their secure communication network, linking all launch sites and coordination facilities. All stations, this is Cedar Ridge Control. Convergence is confirmed. We are go for Operation Family Tree. The next 4 hours passed with excruciating tension. Sarah monitored alien communications, tracking the progression of their formal ceremonies and confirming that the royal families were indeed gathering as anticipated. The translated conversations revealed arrogant confidence in their technological superiority and casual dismissal of human resistance. Capabilities. 1 intercepted transmission. Particularly enraged Tom, an alien. Noble was discussing post-conquest plans for former agricultural regions, describing human survivors as potential work stock for food production operations. The casual dehumanization in the alien's tone reminded Tom of conversations he had heard among enemy officers in Vietnam. The same callous reduction of human life to economic utility. At 08:15 hours, Sarah confirmed that all primary royal bloodlines had arrived in Alpha Ship. The formal succession ceremony was beginning, following protocols that would keep them in close proximity for the next 3 hours. Tom gave the authorization for final launch preparations. The missiles required 30 minutes to reach orbital altitude and another 15 minutes to achieve intercept vectors with their targets. During that window, they would be completely vulnerable to alien defensive systems. Dependent on Colonel Rodriguez's assessment that the aliens had grown overconfident about Earth's technological capabilities. At 0900 hours, Tom gave the launch command. 6 Atlas V rockets lifted off from 3 separate sites within a span of 90 seconds. Their modified guidance systems locked onto target coordinates that Sarah had calculated from weeks of orbital tracking data. Each missile followed a slightly different trajectory, designed to arrive at Alpha Ship from different angles to maximize the probability of successful penetration. The alien response was immediate and devastating. Their defensive systems activated within minutes of detecting the missile launches, sending beams of coherent energy that destroyed 2 rockets while they were still in Earth's atmosphere. A third missile was intercepted just as it reached orbital space, vaporizing in a flash of light visible from the ground. But 3 missiles continued toward their target, their hardened guidance systems maintaining lock on Alpha Ship despite intense electromagnetic interference from alien countermeasures. Sarah tracked their progress through borrowed satellite feeds, calculating intercept probability and impact timing while alien defensive fire lit up the sky around the approaching weapons. The first missile struck Alpha Ship at 0947 hours, punching through the alien hull and detonating inside what appeared to be a primary structural section. The explosion was visible as a brief flare of light against the darkness of space, followed by secondary explosions as alien systems began to fail. The second missile arrived 14 seconds later, impacting near what Sarah's intelligence suggested was the ceremonial chamber where the royal families would be gathered. The explosion was smaller but more contained, indicating successful penetration into the ship's interior spaces. The third missile struck the command section of Alpha Ship, creating a massive explosion that illuminated the other alien vessels in the surrounding formation. For several minutes, Alpha Ship continued to drift in its orbital pattern, showing signs of internal fires and system failures. Then the great ship began to break apart. Through their satellite feeds, the team watched as Alpha Ship slowly disintegrated, throwing debris across a wide orbital path and creating secondary impacts with nearby alien vessels. The other ships in the formation immediately began evasive maneuvers, their tight ceremonial arrangement dissolving into chaotic retreat patterns. Sarah's communication intercepts confirmed what they had hoped to achieve. Panicked alien transmissions filled the radio spectrum, reporting the deaths of multiple royal bloodlines and requesting emergency succession protocols. The formal hierarchy that had coordinated the invasion was collapsing into competing claims and internal conflict. Most importantly, the aliens were withdrawing. Their remaining ships were breaking orbit and heading toward deep space, apparently abandoning their invasion preparations in the face of internal political chaos and the unexpected demonstration of human military capability. Tom Miller, retired farmer from Kansas, had successfully eliminated an alien royal dynasty and disrupted an invasion that threatened the entire planet. He and Sarah stood in their barn, surrounded by the sophisticated equipment that had made their victory possible. Watching satellite feeds confirmed that Earth's skies were clearing of alien vessels. Helen Morrison's voice came over their communication system from the backup facility. Cedar Ridge Control, this is Silo 7. Are we getting confirmation that they're leaving? Sarah keyed her microphone with trembling hands. Silo 7, this is Cedar Ridge, confirmed. The aliens are departing Earth orbit. Operation Family, Tree appears to have achieved complete success. There was silence on the communication network for several moments as the reality of their victory sank in. Then Helen Morrison's voice returned, strong despite her tears. Timothy would. The immediate aftermath of Operation Family Tree created chaos that rippled through both human and alien spheres. Tom and Sarah Miller found themselves at the center of a storm that no amount of planning could have anticipated. Within hours of Alpha Ship's destruction, their secure communications network was buzzing with reports from around the globe. The alien fleet's withdrawal was not the clean victory they had hoped for. While the primary invasion force had indeed retreated into deep space, smaller groups of aliens remained on Earth, apparently stranded when their command structure collapsed. These survivors were scattered across multiple continents, cut off from orbital support but still possessing advanced technology and unclear intentions. More problematically, the human response to their success was fractured and often hostile. Government agencies that had spent months dismissing the alien threat now demanded immediate access to all intelligence and equipment that had made the strike possible. Military commanders who had refused to take action during the crisis suddenly wanted to claim credit for the victory. Politicians who had ignored the rural communities under attack now competed to associate themselves with the successful resistance effort. Sarah spent her first week as an inadvertent war hero fielding calls from federal agents, congressional staffers, and media representatives, all demanding explanations for how retired civilians had accomplished what official channels had failed to attempt. The questions ranged from reasonable requests for tactical debriefing to barely concealed accusations of treason and terrorism. "They're trying to decide whether to give us medals or arrest us," Sarah told Tom during a brief moment of privacy in their kitchen. "Half of Washington wants to study our methods. The other half wants to prosecute us for unauthorized military action." Tom was more concerned about practical matters. Their network of survivor communities needed immediate support to deal with stranded alien groups, several of whom appeared to be attempting to establish defensive positions in remote areas. The government agencies demanding their cooperation were the same ones that had ignored the crisis until civilian action resolved it. Colonel Rodriguez contacted them through secure channels on the third day after the strike. Her voice carried a mixture of professional admiration and personal concern that Tom recognized from his own military experience. "Congratulations are in order," she said. "Also warnings. There are people in Washington who consider what you did an act of vigilantism that sets dangerous precedents. They're seriously discussing charges that could put you away for life." Sarah leaned toward the communication device. "What about the aliens who are still here? Are those same people planning to do anything about the stranded groups?" "That's where things get complicated," Rodriguez replied. "The remaining aliens appear to be from lower social castes, mostly technical and military support personnel, who were not included in the royal succession ceremony. Without their command hierarchy, they seem to be operating independently, some trying to establish contact with other alien forces, others attempting to blend into human populations." Marcus Chen had been monitoring global communications and provided additional context during their next network conference call. Several alien groups were attempting to negotiate with human authorities, offering technological exchanges in return for safe passage off Earth. Others had gone to ground in remote wilderness areas, apparently planning to wait for rescue missions from their home territories. Most concerning were the reports from Dr. Vasquez, who had been tracking alien scientific activity through her remaining contacts in the research community. Some stranded aliens appeared to be conducting biological sampling operations, collecting human genetic material and cultural artifacts for purposes that remained unclear. "They might be trying to complete their original mission," she explained during an encrypted video call. "If they can't conquer Earth through invasion, they might be attempting to gather enough intelligence and specimens to plan a more effective future attack." The implications were disturbing. Operation Family Tree had eliminated the immediate threat but potentially created a longer-term problem. The surviving aliens possessed advanced knowledge of human society and technology, combined with personal motivations for revenge against the species that had destroyed their leadership. Tom made the decision that would define the next phase of their involvement. Rather than surrender their intelligence capabilities to government agencies that had proven unreliable, they would continue operating their network to track and counter the remaining alien presence. The skills and relationships they had developed during the crisis were too valuable to abandon. Sarah supported his decision, but with characteristic attention to detail. "If we're going to keep operating, we need to be smarter about security and legal protection. We can't just be freelance alien hunters. We need official cover or we'll end up in federal prison." The solution came through Helen Morrison's grandson-in-law, who worked as a congressional aide in Washington. Through careful maneuvering and political networking, he arranged for their operation to be retroactively classified as a civilian auxiliary to existing homeland security programs. The designation provided legal protection while maintaining their operational independence. More importantly, it gave them access to resources and intelligence that had been denied during the initial crisis. Satellite tracking data, communication intercepts, and field reports from around the globe began flowing through their secure channels, revealing the scope of the remaining alien presence. The picture that emerged was both encouraging and alarming. Most stranded aliens appeared to be confused and demoralized, struggling to adapt to circumstances their hierarchical society had never prepared them to handle, but approximately 30% were actively working to re-establish contact with alien forces beyond Earth's solar system, using improvised communication equipment built from salvaged technology. Sarah's analysis revealed a critical timeline. The aliens' long-range communication attempts were following a pattern that suggested they expected rescue or reinforcement operations within 18 months. If those operations succeeded, Earth could face a second invasion conducted by aliens who understood human capabilities and had specific reasons for revenge. Tom recognized the strategic implications immediately. They had won the first battle but not the war. The surviving aliens represented both an immediate security threat and a source of intelligence about future threats. Their network needed to transition from crisis response to long-term counterintelligence operations. The first major test of their new capabilities came in August. Satellite surveillance detected unusual activity in the Canadian Rockies, where a group of stranded aliens appeared to be constructing some kind of transmission facility. Canadian authorities were hesitant to take direct action without better intelligence about alien capabilities and intentions. Tom and Sarah found themselves planning their second major operation, this time with official sanction and government support. Their team had grown to include active-duty military specialists, professional intelligence analysts, and scientific advisors. But the core group remained the same, survivors who had lived through the initial crisis and understood both the stakes and the enemy. The operation in Canada revealed the extent to which the aliens had adapted to their situation. The stranded group had established a sophisticated base of operations, complete with defensive systems, and what appeared to be a breeding program designed to maintain their population until rescue arrived. More disturbing, they had been conducting extensive surveillance of nearby human settlements, apparently planning capture operations to acquire additional specimens for their research. The successful raid eliminated 12 aliens and captured extensive technological samples, but also confirmed their worst fears about the survivors' capabilities and intentions. These were not helpless refugees waiting for rescue. They were advanced scouts preparing for the next phase of alien operations against Earth. Sarah spent the autumn months analyzing captured alien communications and technology, building profiles of the various stranded groups and their individual capabilities. The intelligence picture revealed a loose network of alien survivors attempting to coordinate their activities while maintaining minimal contact with each other to avoid detection. Most significantly, her analysis suggested that the aliens had been in contact with their home territories and were providing detailed intelligence about human military capabilities, social organization, and technological development. Earth's successful defense had been noted and studied, with specific attention paid to the methods that had enabled civilian resistance to succeed, where official channels had failed. "They're learning from us," Sarah explained during a briefing with Colonel Rodriguez and her expanded team. "The next invasion, if it comes, will be designed specifically to counter the tactics we used. They'll target civilian communication networks, eliminate potential resistance leaders before they can organize, and probably bring enough force to overwhelm our defensive capabilities." Tom studied the intelligence summaries with growing concern. The aliens' hierarchical society had been disrupted but not destroyed. Other royal bloodlines. Winter arrived early in Kansas, bringing with it intelligence reports that confirmed Sarah's worst predictions. The surviving alien groups on Earth had successfully established contact with their home territories, and the response was everything the Miller team had feared. Long-range surveillance detected massive fleet movements in deep space, heading toward Earth with an estimated arrival time of spring. Tom stood in his renovated barn, now designated as Forward Operations Base Cedar Ridge, watching his team prepare for what everyone understood would be humanity's final stand. The facility had evolved far beyond its agricultural origins, housing advanced computer systems, satellite communication arrays, and strategic planning centers that coordinated defensive operations across multiple continents. The month since their first victory had transformed their loose network of survivors into something approaching a legitimate military organization. Colonel Rodriguez had officially transferred to their command structure, bringing with her a cadre of professional officers who understood that conventional military doctrine was inadequate for the threat they faced. Dr. Vasquez had established research facilities in 3 locations, analyzing captured alien technology and developing countermeasures for the enhanced weapons they expected to face. Most importantly, their success had inspired similar resistance groups around the world. Former military personnel in Europe, South America, and Asia had formed their own networks, sharing intelligence and coordinating preparations for the coming invasion. The global resistance movement that emerged bore little resemblance to official government responses, which remained mired in bureaucratic paralysis and political posturing. Sarah had become the de facto intelligence chief for the global resistance, coordinating information flows between dozens of independent groups while maintaining her primary focus on alien communication intercepts. Her analysis of the incoming fleet revealed both opportunities and devastating challenges. The aliens were bringing overwhelming force, at least 3 times larger than their original invasion fleet, but they were also bringing their royal families again, apparently unable to abandon the ceremonial protocols that had cost them so dearly during the first invasion. The difference was that this time they understood human capabilities and had designed their approach specifically to counter the tactics that had previously succeeded. "They're not making the same mistakes," Sarah explained during a global resistance conference call. "The royal families will be distributed across multiple command ships, never gathering in single locations. Their approach vectors avoid our known missile launch sites. Most critically, they're planning to eliminate our communication networks before beginning ground operations." Marcus Chen, now coordinating resistance operations from a hidden facility in Colorado, provided additional tactical intelligence. "Our analysis suggests they'll target every known resistance leader simultaneously, using intelligence gathered by their survivors here on Earth. They know who we are, where we operate, and what our capabilities are." The implications were sobering. The element of surprise that had enabled their first victory was gone. The aliens would arrive prepared for organized resistance, with specific plans to eliminate the leadership and communication networks that had made human coordination possible. Tom felt the weight of command responsibility that had haunted him since Vietnam, the knowledge that tactical decisions would determine whether his people lived or died. But the scale of this conflict dwarfed anything he had experienced. Failure would mean not just military defeat, but the extinction of human independence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Helen Morrison, now 73 and serving as a communication specialist for their operation, had been monitoring alien transmissions from the approaching fleet when she detected something that had escaped more sophisticated analysis. The aliens were using communication protocols that revealed internal conflicts within their command structure. "They're fighting among themselves," she reported during an emergency briefing. "Different royal bloodlines are competing for territory and precedence, just like they did before. But this time the competition is more intense because they're seeking revenge for their losses." Sarah studied Helen's intercepts with growing excitement. The alien power structure had indeed been damaged by the destruction of Alpha Ship, but the surviving royal families had not achieved consensus about succession protocols or territorial assignments. The invasion fleet was unified in its desire for revenge against humanity, but divided about everything else. "We can use this," Tom realized. "If they're competing with each other, they're vulnerable to divide and conquer tactics." Dr. Vasquez had been analyzing the technical specifications of the approaching alien ships, using intelligence gathered from captured technology and observation of their previous operations. Her findings suggested possibilities that conventional military thinking would have dismissed as impossible. "The aliens' hierarchical society creates technological dependencies," she explained. "Their ships require constant communication with command authority to maintain optimal function. If we could disrupt their internal communications at the right moment, we might be able to create cascading system failures across their entire fleet." The plan that emerged from weeks of intensive preparation was even more audacious than Operation Family Tree. Rather than targeting alien ships directly, they would attempt to manipulate the aliens' own internal conflicts, using their intercepted communications to impersonate rival royal bloodlines and create confusion within their command structure. Sarah's linguistic analysis had identified the specific Protocols used for royal communication, including authentication methods and ceremonial language patterns. With captured alien technology, they could potentially broadcast false communications that would appear authentic to alien receivers, creating artificial conflicts and coordination failures within the invasion fleet. The operation required precise timing and unprecedented coordination. Resistance groups around the world would simultaneously broadcast false alien communications, each designed to convince different royal bloodlines that they were being betrayed or undermined by their rivals. The goal was not to defeat the aliens militarily, but to create enough internal chaos to disrupt their invasion coordination. Tom understood that they were gambling everything on a single desperate gambit. If the deception failed, humanity would face a unified alien invasion with no remaining element of surprise. If it succeeded, they might turn the aliens' own social structure against them. 3 days before the alien fleet's projected arrival, Tom received a message that crystallized everything they were fighting for. A group of survivors from the original Cedar Ridge community had gathered at the abandoned elementary school where Sarah had taught for 30 years. They sent a video message showing children playing in the empty classrooms, families picnicking in the schoolyard that should have been full of students. "We know you're fighting for all of us," Helen Morrison's daughter said in the message. "We know our families, our children, our way of life depends on what you do next. Whatever happens, we're proud of you. Timothy would be proud of you." Tom showed the message to Sarah that evening as they sat on their back porch, watching the stars and knowing that somewhere among them, an alien fleet was approaching with enough firepower to reduce Earth to a lifeless rock. They were 2 retired Americans preparing to attempt the most complex psychological warfare operation in human history, betting their species' future on their understanding of alien royal politics. "Are we completely insane?" Sarah asked quietly. Tom took her hand, feeling the calluses from decades of farm work and months of operating military equipment. "Probably. But we've been crazy before, and it worked out pretty well." Sarah squeezed his fingers. Timothy Morrison figured out that aliens might have royal families. A 8-year-old boy saw something that all the experts missed. Maybe ordinary people can see things that sophisticated analysis overlooks. "Maybe," Tom agreed. "Or maybe we're just too stubborn to give up." The next morning, they began final preparations for Operation Royal Flush, humanity's last gamble against an enemy that had underestimated the determination of families fighting for their survival. Above them, the alien fleet continued its approach, confident in their superior technology and unified desire for revenge, unaware that their own royal protocols were about to become weapons turned against them. The alien fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, exactly when Sarah's calculations had predicted. Their arrival created electromagnetic disturbances that lit up monitoring stations around the globe, confirming the massive scale of the force humanity now faced. 147 ships ranging from massive dreadnoughts to smaller support vessels, all bearing the technological signatures of an empire bent on absolute conquest. Tom Miller stood in the command center of Forward Operations Base Cedar Ridge, surrounded by displays showing the global resistance network that had grown from his wife's dining room table research. 43 resistance cells across 6 continents were standing by, each equipped with captured alien communication technology and prepared to execute the most complex deception operation in military history. The aliens' approach was methodical and overwhelming. Their lead ships positioned themselves to blockade major population centers while communication jamming systems began disrupting human satellite networks. Within hours of their arrival, most conventional military forces found themselves blind and unable to coordinate responses. It was exactly the scenario that government planners had feared and failed to prepare for. But the aliens had made one critical error in their preparation. Their intelligence about human resistance capabilities was based on observations of their previous operation, when the resistance had been forced to use human technology and conventional tactics. They were unprepared for an enemy that had spent months studying alien technology and social structure, learning to think like their opponents and turn alien strengths into weaknesses. Sarah's voice cut through the tension in the command center as she announced the beginning of their operation. "All stations, this is Cedar Ridge Control. The fleet has achieved attack formation. Operation Royal Flush is authorized. Execute immediate." Around the globe, resistance cells began broadcasting carefully crafted alien communications, each designed to exploit the royal rivalries that Sarah had identified through months of intelligence analysis. The messages were works of linguistic art, using authentic alien protocols and ceremonial language to create false evidence of betrayal and conspiracy among the competing bloodlines. The European Resistance Cell broadcast communications suggesting that the Crimson Throne bloodline was planning to claim territorial rights that belonged to the Azure Crown dynasty. The Asian group sent messages indicating that the Golden Scepter family was secretly negotiating with human authorities to betray their rivals. Each false communication was carefully timed and authenticated using protocols captured from stranded aliens, creating a web of artificial conflict within the invasion fleet. The alien response was immediate and exactly what they had hoped for. Within minutes of the false communications, the invasion fleet began to lose coordination. Ships that should have been advancing in unified formation instead began maneuvering to defensive positions, apparently preparing for internal conflict rather than focusing on their human targets. Sarah monitored the alien communication channels, watching their careful plans dissolve into chaos as royal bloodlines demanded explanations for perceived betrayals and accused rivals of violating sacred protocols. The hierarchical society that had been their strength during the original invasion was now their greatest vulnerability. "It's working," she announced with barely contained excitement. "They're fragmenting exactly as predicted. The Golden Scepter ships are moving to intercept Azure Crown vessels. The Crimson Throne dreadnought is demanding immediate conference with Fleet Command." Tom felt the familiar cold clarity of tactical success, but he knew their advantage was temporary. Eventually, the aliens would realize they were being manipulated and restore unified command. The resistance needed to maximize their opportunity while the confusion lasted. Colonel Rodriguez coordinated the next phase of their operation, directing conventional military forces to strike alien ships that had become isolated during the internal chaos. Missiles launched from hidden bases achieved unprecedented success against targets that were focused on their own fleet, rather than defending against human attacks. The most dramatic success occurred when the Azure Crown's primary command ship, convinced that they were under attack by rival bloodlines, accidentally fired on two other alien vessels while attempting to defend against perceived betrayal. The fratricidal engagement that followed eliminated 3 major ships and created a cascade of accusations and counter-accusations that spread throughout the fleet. Marcus Chen's technical analysis revealed that the aliens' technological advantages were dependent on unified command protocols. As their fleet organization collapsed into competing factions, individual ships began experiencing system failures and coordination problems that made them vulnerable to conventional human weapons. But the aliens were not helpless. Their military commanders began asserting direct control, overriding royal protocols to restore tactical discipline. Several bloodlines recognized that they were being manipulated and attempted to communicate warnings to other ships. Most critically, their technological superiority remained overwhelming once they managed to focus on human targets rather than each other. The turning point came when Dr. Vasquez's worst-case scenario materialized. The Supreme Azure Admiral, apparently the highest-ranking military commander in the fleet, managed to establish emergency protocols that overrode royal authority and unified the remaining ships under direct military control. The confused maneuvering stopped, and the aliens began advancing toward Earth with deadly purpose. "Royal Flush achieved partial success," Sarah reported grimly. "We eliminated approximately 30% of their fleet through internal conflict. But the survivors are now under unified military command. They're no longer vulnerable to political manipulation." Tom studied the tactical displays, showing the reduced but still overwhelming alien force. Approaching Earth, they had achieved more than anyone had thought possible, but it was not enough. 68 alien ships remained operational, more than sufficient to overwhelm human defenses and complete their invasion objectives. The final phase of the battle belonged to Helen Morrison. The 73-year-old grandmother had been monitoring alien communications throughout Operation Royal Flush, and she had identified something that even Sarah's sophisticated analysis had missed. The emergency military protocols that had saved the alien fleet contained a fatal flaw. "They're using outdated authentication codes," she announced during the desperate final briefing. When the military commanders took control, They reverted to older security protocols because the royal systems were compromised. But those older codes follow patterns that we can predict. Sarah stared at the communication intercepts that Helen had isolated. The elderly woman was right. The aliens' military emergency procedures used authentication systems that were more primitive than their royal protocols, apparently designed for crisis situations when complex ceremonial procedures were impractical. Working with captured alien technology, they could potentially impersonate the Supreme Azure Admiral himself, issuing false commands that would appear authentic to ships throughout the fleet. It was their last desperate gambit, made possible by the insight of a grandmother who had learned alien linguistics to honor her grandson's memory. The final deception was elegantly simple. Using the Supreme Admiral's authentication codes, Sarah broadcast a fleet-wide command ordering immediate withdrawal to deep space for strategic reassessment and hierarchical restructuring. The order appeared to come from the highest military authority and was phrased in language that suggested the invasion had succeeded in gathering necessary intelligence about human capabilities. The alien response was swift and complete. Within hours, the entire surviving fleet was retreating beyond Earth's orbital space, apparently convinced that they had achieved their objectives and been ordered to return for the next phase of operations. Tom and Sarah stood on their back porch that evening, watching the stars return to normal as the alien fleet disappeared into deep space. They were exhausted, overwhelmed, and quietly amazed that their impossible gambit had succeeded. "Do you think they'll come back?" Sarah asked. Tom considered the question seriously. "Maybe, but if they do, they'll be facing humans who have proven twice that technological superiority isn't enough. We've shown that ordinary people can outthink military empires when they're fighting for their families." Sarah leaned against her husband, feeling the satisfaction of a teacher whose most difficult students had finally learned their lesson. Timothy Morrison was 8 years old when he figured out that aliens might have royal families. He started this whole thing with one simple observation. And now his memory is protected by the fact that alien royal families will think twice before threatening human children again. Tom replied. Above them, the stars shone peacefully on a world where families could remain together, where retired farmers and school teachers could save civilization through careful planning and desperate courage, and where the bonds between ordinary people had proven stronger than the ambitions of galactic empires. The Miller farm would return to growing corn and wheat, but the barn would keep its sophisticated